Hello and welcome back to Heavenly Minded. I'm Chloe Wilson, I'm from UCB2, and this podcast is all about what it means to be in the world and not of it. You may have heard that phrase before. Some people are so heavenly minded, they're of no earthly good. Now, as Christians, we are in the world, we're here at this point in time on this earth, but how do we look to heaven without looking to heaven so much that we become, well, a little bit useless on this earth? That's what we're seeking to explore. We're joined by a variety of different guests, and today I'm really excited to say that we'll be chatting with Emma Borquaye. Now, she is the founder of Girl Got Faith, the teen girl's guide to a faith-filled life. But we're not going to be talking about that. We'll be having a chat about parenting and what it means to be a parent in this world, but also to do it with a heavenly minded perspective. Now, Emma is a relatively new mum. She's been a mum for about 2 years now. Really looking forward to hearing what she has to say on this subject. And just a little disclaimer, what we say in this conversation today, it's not a do's and don'ts. We're not saying you must do this as a parent or you should not do that, because I appreciate that parents will parent in a completely different way. And me, at this point in time, I am not a parent, so I have absolutely no experience whatsoever. So let's see how this goes. Well, Emma Borquaye, it is so lovely to chat to you again. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. I'm so pleased that I was able to talk to you again, because I'm really intrigued to hear what you have to say today on this particular subject of raising kids, because it's a little bit different to what we spoke about last time.
Yeah, it's very different, and I hope that I have enough to say, but hopefully I will.
Don't worry, I've got a million and one questions to ask you, so hopefully we should have a lot to talk about. But Emma, you are the founder of Girl Got Faith, which I just have to say on a side note is wonderful. It's all the resources that I wish I had when I was growing up. So go and check out the work that they do there. But you're also wife to Isaac, otherwise known as Governor B, and you're a mum to Ezra. Now, Ezra is nearly 2 years old. I've seen his pictures on social media, seen the little videos. He's absolutely gorgeous. But why that name? Why Ezra?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I think he's gorgeous too. But it's always funny because I feel like every parent obviously thinks their child is the most beautiful child in the world. But then sometimes I look back at pictures from when he was like a newborn baby. And even then I was like, he's the most beautiful child in the world. But now I'm like, oh, he did look a bit squished. But he was beautiful to me anyway. But yeah, the name Ezra, well, it actually means helper. And we didn't know what his character was going to be like, obviously, before he was born. But since he's been here with us, and definitely now in his toddler type years, he's actually really living up to the name of being a helper. He loves helping around the house. If I start cleaning, he'll always get a little cloth and come and sit next to me and scrub the same place. Not that it's always super helpful, but it's nice that he wants to be involved. If you're emptying the dishwasher, he'll pass you the plates. He's very, very good. But yeah, before, when we were choosing the name, me and Isaac actually didn't agree on any names. We had such different opinions on what we should call our child. And then there was this app called Kinder, which is like Tinder for baby names. And you and the person who you're choosing a name with both log in on the same bit, and it shows you loads of different names, and you swipe left or right on the names that you like and don't like, and then it tells you when you get a match. And we literally only got a match on one name, and that was Ezra.
Wow, I
So yeah.
did not know that that kind of app existed. I mean, they say that there is an app for everything, and I was like, no, there can't be. But that just goes to show that there pretty much is. That is such a genius invention. I'm assuming you knew then that Ezra was going to be a boy.
Yeah. So we found out that he was going to be a boy, and then we started thinking of names.
I love that he actually lives up to it as well. It's a biblical name as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it so much. Such a beautiful name.
So let's talk about being a mum in this day and age, because things have changed since when our mums and our dads were bringing us up 20, 30, for some people, very long time ago. What would you say is the best thing about being a mum?
Ooh, that's a hard question. There are a lot of good things about being a mum. I think it stretches you in ways that you didn't know you could be stretched, like mentally with your capacity and stuff, which can sometimes be a real challenge. But I think you realize how much that can be applied everywhere in life. And you realize you have so much more to give than what you thought you did. And not only in motherhood, but even in your friendships and your relationships and your work and everything. I think for me, I felt like I discovered an extra part of myself that wasn't just being a mum, but it was like this extra bit that I had that I didn't know that I had in me.
So then on the flip side, what would you say is one of the hardest things about being a mum?
I think probably for me, it's always being on. So even when you rest, you're still kind of thinking about it a bit, or I don't know, it's really hard to switch off, I think. And I'm very much a person who likes to kind of keep things in their place. So like compartmentalize my life a little bit. So I'm like, right, I'm doing this today and that's what I'm going to focus on. Then tomorrow I'm doing this and that's what I'm going to focus on. But I think when you have a child, no matter what you're doing, your focus is still always on them slightly in a way. So not really having that space to kind of properly switch off is difficult. But I feel like it probably gets better with time. And maybe the more children you have, maybe you just learn. I don't know. Maybe it's because Ezra's only 2. I haven't quite got it yet, but hopefully I do one day.
I have no experience when it comes to being a mum, but from mums I have spoken to, I think every single one of them has always implied that they've never fully had it or got it. And I think every mum is always going to feel like they could do this better or do that better. But then just think about the child, and like when Ezra grows up, I know for a fact that he will love you and respect you for the way that you've brought him up. Because I think back to the way that my mum brought me up. I was in a loving Christian home, and yeah, there were times when I didn't necessarily like my mum and the things that she said and the things that she made me do. But now I look back, and yes, she wasn't perfect, but she was my mum, and that's what just made her the absolute best.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so funny how, as you get older, you have more of an appreciation for other areas of your life and what your parents did for you and things like that. It's amazing.
So when you were growing up, what kind of environment were you growing up in terms of your mum and dad and the way that they brought you up?
Yeah, I think similarly to you, I was also in a Christian home. So I've got 2 older sisters, and we grew up going to church. My parents actually became Christians when my oldest sister was like, I think she was a few years old, maybe 4. And so they had become Christians since becoming parents, which is quite amazing.
Mm.
But I think that meant that the way they raised us was very much their faith was at the forefront. And it was something that they really treasured and valued because it was still fairly new to them. Not that your faith kind of becomes old, but I think when you're new to faith, you definitely have more of kind of a fire within you sometimes, and you want to get things right, and you realize that there's a different way to do life. And it kind of felt like my parents had discovered this whole new way to do life, to be gracious, to be forgiving, to love other people and put other people first. And I actually feel like me and my sisters got to be kind of firsthand recipients of that transformation in their lives. So I think for us growing up in our home environment, it was very Christian. It was very faith-based, but in all the best ways, really encouraging. Yeah, it was just brilliant, to be honest. And yeah, like you said, there's always times when your parents annoy you, or they upset you, or they push you to do things, or they challenge you and you just don't want to be challenged. So yeah, there were definitely times when I would go to my room and be like, oh, I hate my mom. And then be like, sorry, God, I don't really hate her. But yeah, definitely now I feel like, wow, if I could be half the mum to Ezra that my mum was to me, I would be so happy.
I've said that to my mum before, although every single time I mention the idea of being a mum myself, she goes, Chloe, no, I'm not ready to be a grandma or a grandmother or a nan or a nanny or anything else. She shuts it down completely. And I'm like, Mum, I'm trying to give you a compliment, but she still refuses to accept that her baby girl has kind of left the nest and has gone and has got married and has got a job and all of this. And I think she's living in denial, I think, about the fact that one day I'm going to have a baby kind of thing, if the Lord allows
Oh,
me to, but that's just always the way that she's been. But I'm just thinking, were there some things that your mum kind of did to bring you up, maybe even your dad, different things that they did that you've then noticed yourself doing with Ezra, if that makes sense?
yeah, I think one of the things that as I got older, I realized that I really valued about my parents, and I think I've subconsciously started doing it with Ezra, is although we had a faith upbringing and we went to church and stuff like that, there was always a lot of freedom and a lot of choice in our lives. And I never really felt pushed to be a certain type of person or be a certain type of way. I did genuinely feel like I made a lot of decisions for myself out of trial and error. And I had the freedom to do that with the safety net of knowing that my parents loved me and supported me no matter what. And so, even in Ezra's tiny age of nearly 2, just allowing him to explore. And even Isaac and I were having a conversation the other day, and we were literally, probably all parents have this conversation, but we were saying, oh, what do you think Ezra's going to be when he gets older? What kind of talent do you think he's going to have? What career do you think he's going to go into? And then we both listed about 25 things, and we were like, we think he's going to do everything. We were like, maybe he could be a singer or an artist or a comedian or all of these different things. And I think I realized even in that conversation, oh my goodness, I don't want to box him into anything. I don't even want to have in my mind what I think he's going to be or who I think he's going to become. I just am enjoying so much watching him enjoy life and explore things and see his face light up in a whole load of different ways, and just continue to be on that journey with him and just know that I'm there for him all the time. So yeah, that's definitely something that I would love for Ezra to grow up feeling and knowing as well.
Mm. From the videos and the pictures that I've seen on your social media, he definitely seems to be like he is a bit of an explorer. So if he's nearly 2, that means he was born in September. So this was
Yeah.
just a few months before the pandemic hit, right?
Yeah, so we went to LA when Ezra was 4 months old. And I remember when we were coming home, we were at the airport and we could see on the screens, they had all the news and they were talking about this thing called coronavirus. And they were saying, like, beware in the airport, make sure you're washing your hands and all this. And we were like, what? We were so confused.
Yeah.
And then there were a few people on the airplane wearing masks. And there was probably only about 4 people on the whole plane wearing a mask. And I was like, are they going to wear a mask this entire flight? That's a really long flight. And then I remember being like to Isaac, okay, maybe we should just like wash the seats or something before we sit down. We had no idea what it was. And then when we came back, that shortly after then everything kind of went into proper lockdown. So Ezra was about 4 or 5 months old. Now, yeah, he's nearly 2, and we've only just come out of it.
That's crazy. And the fact that you were a very new parents at the time too when lockdown hit. How was that for you? Because so often friends and families come and support you, they rally around you, they take shifts so you can go and get some rest and all of that. But I guess at 4 months old, being in a global pandemic, he can't have the same family interaction and friends can't come and help you in the same way.
Yeah, that was definitely quite a hard time because not so much from the help aspect, but just I knew my upbringing was very much surrounded by so many people. I've got loads of cousins, and even my sisters now, they've got 3 children each. So Ezra's got lots of cousins too. And me wanting him to grow up around them the same way that I grew up around mine, I was a bit sad that he couldn't really get to experience that. And maybe he was missing out on things, and that there wasn't the soft play that he could go to, and we couldn't go swimming, and we couldn't do all of the activities that you would usually do when you're on maternity leave, because the majority of my maternity leave was just in lockdown.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I do feel such gratitude that we had Ezra when we did, because the the time when I actually had him, we weren't in lockdown. The world was absolutely fine. There was no fear
Mm.
of the virus or anything like that. And so I got to have an incredible birth and had an amazing experience in the hospital. And even in those first few weeks of being at home, I got to have all my friends and family round, and I did get that support. And I think by the time of around 4 months, I was definitely feeling so much more confident in motherhood. I felt like I was kind of getting into the flow of it. I was understanding what I was meant to do. I felt, yeah, a lot more secure and confident. But since then, I've seen friends of mine and even my sister have a baby during all of the restrictions with the hospital and everything like that, and I can see how hard that is.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I definitely feel grateful that I kind of skipped that bit, but I totally have so much compassion for anybody who's going through that right now, and I can't imagine how hard that must be.
Well, Emma, this podcast is all about being heavenly minded. We use the phrase being in the world, but not of it. Now, just taking that little phrase there, what does that mean to you?
I always have interpreted it as being in the world in the way that Jesus was in the world. So Jesus came down to earth so that he could identify with us as human beings. He could identify with our struggle. He knew how it felt to be in some of the positions that we're in our lives. But then by being not of it, is that you're also a daughter of God or a son of God, and you can carry yourself differently. There are things that will happen in your life or in the lives of people around you that you can have compassion for and empathy for, because you understand how it feels, you understand how it might hurt, but you respond differently because you have that connection with God and that relationship with God. So that's kind of how I've always interpreted that saying, but I don't know if it's correct.
No, well, I mean, it's open to interpretation 100%. And it's just a phrase that I think as Christians we hear quite a lot. We'll often hear it being talked about in the pulpit, but then when it comes to defining it, I think everyone has got a slightly different definition. But I think, as you say, going back to Jesus and thinking about the way that Jesus lived his life, he essentially was in the world and he was not of it, and he was the perfect example. So I think that's a really beautiful interpretation. But then when it comes to being a parent and raising kids, how do you do that? How do you be in the world and not of it when you're bringing your children up?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I noticed that actually surprised me was from the moment that I found out that I was pregnant, how much fear there is.
Okay.
And you kind of always think, oh, I don't know, having a baby is such a happy time, and having children is such an amazing thing, and having family is so wonderful. And I don't know, I think there's this view of it that it's this beautiful, amazing time. But then when you're actually in it, it feels like there's this whole different message that comes from the world. Like, you should be worried about this, you should be worried about that. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if, I don't know, something happens with your health or your child? And and there's so much to then fear. And I wasn't expecting that at all. And I think from the moment that I got pregnant, I had to be really intentional about what I was allowing into my mind, and calling things out as fear, and knowing what was real and what wasn't, knowing what was just somebody else's experience that they were telling me that was probably going to make me feel fearful, or what was the truth of what God says he can do for me, or how God can help me, or how God is my strength. I'm really trying to cling onto those things. And I think that carries through not only in like the pregnancy and labor side of things where there is a lot of fear, but also when you do have children, there are so many devices and things that you can get that keep your children safe. So there's like just so many different things, even a cot mattress thing that monitors your child's heart rate whilst they're asleep. It's like, wow, okay, that's amazing. And I'm sure that has helped a lot of people. But equally, it's such a thing that is sold to us that we need to fear for our children and we need to worry about them, and we're solely responsible for them. And there's that pressure because we are responsible for them. And when you leave the hospital with your child for the first time, you feel that overwhelming sense of, oh my gosh, are they just going to let me go? Like, nobody's given me a manual, what am I doing? But then from that point, you're kind of then left to the world, and you're left to the forums online that when your child has a rash, it's like, okay, but what if it's this and what if it's that, and da da da. And you think that we're meant to just go for worst case scenario every time, because we're told that means you're being a good parent. You're looking out for your child the best if you think the worst, and I guess eliminate every option. But actually trying to cling to faith throughout the whole process is really important.
Mm.
And I think holding the two, so holding wisdom and information and learning about things and science and understanding how we are as humans and how we're formed and all that kind of stuff is really important, and getting doctors' advice, but also having faith and knowing that God actually put you as that child's parent. God specifically chose you to raise that child. He entrusted you with them, and he did that for a reason, because he trusts you and he knows that you're going to love them and give them everything that they need. And we can go to God with our worries and our fears. We don't have to project them onto the world around us, and we don't have to project them onto our child, but we can actually kind of shut things down before they take over. We don't have to let fear rule the way that we parent. And I think it brings a lot more freedom in exploring and in learning how you want to be a parent yourself, rather than going off of everybody else's experience that may have been a negative one.
Do you ever worry about the world that Ezra is growing up in? Because the world that we live in today is so very different to when you were little, when you were nearly 2 years old, when I was nearly 2 years old. Things have changed dramatically. So is that something that you ever are concerned about?
Yeah, truthfully, yeah. And I don't even know if I'm concerned about him as such. Like, I'm not necessarily worried about his safety or
Mm.
anything like that. But I think it's more about how I, as a parent, am going to navigate things, because I think things change so much. And I think our children are learning about things that maybe we didn't learn about,
Yeah.
or we haven't learned about in the same way. And I would never want to come across as ignorant or naive to my child, so that they eye roll me when I'm like trying to say something. They're like, Mum, you just don't get it. But I think the pace at which the world is moving and the pace that conversations are happening, I hope that I can keep up,
Mm.
but not just keep up with the world's view and the world's opinion, but I can keep on measuring that against the word of God.
Yeah.
And I can keep going to God and saying, God, what do you think about this? Rather than just being in my own head and thinking, yeah, well, this is what I was taught and this is what I believe, so this is what I'm going to teach my child. But actually being open to these new conversations, because with everything there is things to learn. We can never stop learning, but at the same time, not putting your faith to one side and not just taking things as they are just because that's what everybody's telling you, but actually knowing how to navigate that as a Christian and with
Mm.
God, and teaching Ezra to ask those same questions, and teaching him to not shut things down or shut things off or say, this is my opinion and I'm not going to change it, but always be open to exploring something, but exploring it with God. And I think those types of conversations will probably have to happen more
Mm.
with me and Ezra than they had happened with me and my parents, because I think less changed.
Mm.
I think probably the biggest things for our generation, I'm guessing, was the internet. I don't know, like YouTube videos, accessibility to images and media and things
Introduction
like
to
that.
social media too, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That, and phones, so your individual handheld device.
Yeah.
Um, so those were kind of the biggest things for us, I guess, that we had to navigate. So maybe it would be a good conversation for me to have with my parents and ask how they felt, how they actually navigated it. Because it seemed like it didn't really bother them,
Mm.
but maybe it did. I don't know. How did it feel for you when you were growing up? Did you feel like there was tension there with like your mom feeling worried about you having a phone or anything like that?
I think my parents, they put quite a lot of trust in me. And as I think about it, I think I betrayed a little bit of that trust. I had a phone, but it was never the best phone. It was always slightly far behind everyone else. I
Yes.
remember my friends had the pink LG cookie that like you could tilt on its side and you could flip and you slide the screen up and there was a little keypad. I had a standard like slide up phone from three. It was like a 3 ohm brand phone. And then my first touchscreen phone that I got was the Hawaii one or something, and I had it for that long because my parents weren't that bothered about me having a phone. They just let me have it so that I could like call them if I needed to when I was walking to and from home. So the first kind of time was when my mum's uncle bought me and my sister, it was called the Google Nexus, and it was like a little tablet, and I could all of a sudden download all of these apps, and I didn't know what apps were. And I remember downloading Snapchat, and that's when I got on Instagram. And then I downloaded various other different apps. And then one of them in particular was the then version of Tinder, and it was called Hot or Not. And I was I was in secondary school at the time, year nine, and I was on a then version of Tinder because I was lonely and I wanted a boyfriend. And I have since told my parents this is not like turning into a big confession. I used to say that I was going to go for a walk, or say I was just going to pop to the shops for a bit and meet a certain friend, and I'd be going out meeting some random boy who
Oh no.
I know, and I sit here now and I go, Chloe, what was going on there? But yet at the same time, I can look back and I can go, God was doing something even then, because it kept spiraling down and down and down. Nothing horrific ever happened. You know, I was never attacked, or it was never someone catfishing. They were always who they said they were. But it just kind of was like one guy after the next. And then if they ghosted me or dropped me, which happened an awful lot, I'd then just move on and find someone else and see if I could find my identity there. So I did betray that trust. But at the same time, they did put that trust in me, and they said, okay, we're just going to let you kind of go now and start to find your own way. And I think they did have an idea of what was going on. But that was kind of my experience with all of that.
That is sometimes the thing though, because I always think, oh yeah, I definitely probably did things that I thought that my parents didn't know about. But now I look back and I'm like, oh, they definitely knew. They just didn't say it. So
Mm.
I wonder when Ezra kind of gets into his teen years, if he thinks that he's being really sly and like getting away with something, but I'm just watching, like, I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you kind of keep a watchful eye and you choose what to say and what not to say.
Because I think actually, if my mum and dad had maybe known what was going on and stepped in, I think some things they were completely oblivious to, other things they completely knew what was going on with me. I think they maybe chose not to say. They let me kind of make the mistakes for myself, because if they'd have kind of come along and gone, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be doing this instead, they would have just constantly been spoon feeding me. How would I then go on to be independent and to make my own decisions? Like there's getting that balance in there. And I'm going to be completely biased here and say that I love the way that my parents raised me and my sister. And at the time I didn't like it at all. But I stand here now, and as you know, going back to what you said earlier, if I can be half the parent that my parents were, I'll know that I'll have done at least a little bit of something right, because my parents they were just incredible. And people used to tell me that all the time. You've got incredible parents, the way that they bring you up. And I go, no, I haven't, because they make me do this and they make me do that. But now I go, no, they were so right.
Oh, I'm sure they know how much you appreciate them now.
Well, they better do. They better be listening to this episode of the podcast. Otherwise, I'm not repeating all
Yeah,
of
we'll
this
send
all
it
over
to
again. I have to. I also have to tell them. But I'm just thinking, going back to social media for a moment, you are very open, and you will quite happily put pictures and videos of Ezra on social media. Was that something that you thought about? Because I know that for some parents, they choose to keep everything very private. They'll show themselves maybe, but they won't show their children. Was that maybe a discussion that you had with Isaac?
Yeah, it's definitely an important discussion for anyone, even with the people in your life that aren't the other parent to the child.
Yeah.
If that's something that you don't want, if you don't want pictures of your child online, that is completely fine, and you should let people know that, and everybody should respect that completely. I think at the beginning, when Ezra was first born, we definitely weren't, I don't know, you do definitely feel so protective. So we just felt like, oh, we don't want people to see his face. There's no need. We just want friends and family to see him. So we would send pictures to friends and family. I actually had a close friends group on Instagram as well, which was just my closest friends and my family. And I'd post pictures of him on there so that they could keep up to date. But then as he's got a bit older, we do share more of him, but I think we try and be quite wise with it. So just being intentional about not putting pictures of him on his own, because there's a bit more risk there in terms of somebody taking the picture and like using it in an advert or something.
Yeah.
Not that that's necessarily the biggest fear, but yeah, just being intentional and mindful about how you do things, about how you share things, about not sharing your location, about not sharing things even though it's on Instagram story, it's actually not in real time. So maybe you film something earlier and then later that day or the next day you think, oh, I'd like to share this, so you post it, and that's fine, nobody knows that you were there at that time or anything. So I think it's about being cautious, but I just think it's up to every parent to decide what they feel is most appropriate. I think you definitely see it with people in the public eye being more cautious about sharing their children online. And I think that's because of the law of right to privacy, isn't it? That as soon as you share a picture of yourself online, you lose your right to privacy. So a news outlet could publish a picture of your face without your consent, kind of thing, which is crazy. But yeah, there's so much to it. But I just think whatever anybody feels most comfortable with. And that's how we feel at the moment. Every now and again, I'm like, oh, should I just delete all the pictures of Ezra?
Yeah. This is going to sound very bizarre, me saying this out loud, but whenever I see, people who I've spoken to before and I see them and their family, I almost feel like I become a bit of an auntie. And I look at them and I go, oh, look at them, they're growing up. And I guess in a way, you're kind of allowing people into your family and sharing in some of those moments that are clearly very precious. And I think social media has got a real positive there, the fact that you're able to invite people and get little glimpses into someone's life. But I guess at the same time, you've always got to remember that it's never the full picture and it's never all the polished, beautiful photos where everyone's smiling and dancing. There's obviously the flip side to it too. But I love that you are very intentional about the things that you post and that you think everything through. I think that is very admirable. And it's definitely something that I'm going to make a mental note in the back of here. So if and when the time comes, I've got something in the back of my head.
Yeah, I think I'm also just a bit like sick of social media being such a curated platform and people really just kind of, I don't know, I just think real life is important to share. And I think real life is what is encouraging for people, because that's how we connect with one another, is when we really get a glimpse of who each other are, and we can learn a bit more about ourselves through looking at other people. So I try and just keep my social media as more of like a real life diary of my life in some sort of way. So yeah, I think it would have felt weird for me to not include Ezra in that. But yeah, there's definitely times when I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Emma, this has been really, really insightful, actually, and I appreciate that you are still learning as a mum, and I know for a fact that you will continue to learn, but I really appreciate all the different pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us on the podcast today. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but the things that, you've shared, thank you so much for sharing them and for opening up your little family to us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to call you Auntie Chloe from now on, because you said that you're Auntie Chloe to Ezra. So that's who you can be to me as well.
Well, as I said at the start of this episode, this was not supposed to be a you must parent in this way, you must parent in that way. Maybe you've got kids, they're all grown up now, they've left home, and you did things in a slightly different way. Maybe you're a relatively new parent and you can relate to some of the things that Emma was speaking of. Maybe, again, you do things differently. Either way, I'd love to hear your comments and your opinions. Do you agree with the things that Emma was saying? Maybe there are things that you'd like to suggest. Get in touch and let me know what you think. You can send me an email. Just send it to chloe@ucb.co.uk. And I would love to hear if you've got any suggestions for future topics to discuss on the podcast. I'm keen to hear what you'd like to hear from Heavenly Minded. But thank you so much for being a part of this episode. It's been wonderful to spend this time with you. Don't forget, new episodes are out every single Wednesday via the UCB player or wherever you get your podcast from. If you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, please follow us. And if you can, leave us a rating and a review. That would be so helpful. Anyway, enough from me. Enjoy the rest of your day and I'll speak to you soon.